for attending this evening's public hearing to discuss the increased number of weapons found at the Columbus Airport Authority security checkpoints. Just a reminder, any person who takes any action to obstruct or interfere with the conduct of this evening meeting may be charged with disturbing a lawful meeting pursuant to Columbus City Code 2317.12, and any person who enters the areas of Columbus City Council chambers reserved for city officials or invited guests may be charged with criminal trespass pursuant to Columbus City Code 2311.21. Copies of this evening's agenda and information on the proposed legislation are available at the entrance of council chambers. Last year, representatives from the Columbus Regional Airport Authority approached me about growing concerns around firearms and other weapons detected at airport security checkpoints. I was concerned by the sheer number of firearms and the casual nature of passengers who attempted to bring a weapon into such a secure area with such high volume of passengers. Following that conversation, I wanted to bring all parties together to discuss this growing issue. This evening, we'll hear presentations from the Columbus Regional Airport Authority and their police chief on the scope of the problem. Then we'll have an opportunity to discuss how we may empower law enforcement to address this threat to public safety. I'd like to invite Miss Christian Easterday from the Columbus Airport Authority to please introduce our first presenter. Kristen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And first, I'd like to start by thanking our members of the Columbus City Council, especially you, Councilmember and Public Safety Committee Chair Mitchell Brown, for recognizing the importance of this public safety matter. The Columbus Regional Airport Authority would also like to express our thanks to the support from Mayor Andrew Ginther and his City Attorney Zach Klein. John Glenn International and Rickenbacker International provide a combined total of nearly 160 daily departures to 48 destinations every day. Our mission is to connect Ohio with the world, and we're doing just that at our airports. In 2019, at John Glenn Columbus International alone, 8.6 million passengers traveled through, another record year of travel by Central Ohioans. In collaboration with our TSA partners, we are committed to providing a safe and secure airport environment, which brings us to the purpose of why we're here today. We deeply appreciate City Council's assistance in considering a more enforceable law that includes a consequence, a reminder to passengers who attempt to bring prohibited firearms or weapons through TSA security checkpoints. We are hopeful that this will serve as a stronger deterrent, therefore creating a safer environment. According to the TSA, record numbers of firearms are being discovered in carry-on luggage at airports throughout the United States. Since 2014, nationally, the number of firearms discovered at TSA checkpoints has doubled. That's a similar trend to what we have seen locally, where growth in discovered firearms has grown by 81% since 2014. At John Glenn International in 2019, TSA officials discovered 29 firearms at the TSA security checkpoint. That's nearly 11% more firearms and carry-ons than there were in 2018. That's an average of 2 firearms being discovered each month. And of those firearms discovered at the checkpoint, 82% were loaded. These discoveries are occurring despite airport, airline, and TSA signage at airport entrances, airline ticket and gate counters, and TSA security checkpoints. Travelers have been put on notice multiple times prior to going through the security checkpoint. You can see these signs are at our entrance, as well as our sky cap. Multiple signs if you are going through ticketing at the counters, as well as prior to entering the TSA security line, as well as going throughout the security line. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of our airport police chief, Ron Gray, and all our airport police officers and our local TSA teams who work daily to ensure that our airports and the entire air transportation system are safe. In conjunction with this new ordinance, if passed, the Airport Authority intends to help inform the traveling public, and we have a plan in place to elevate this matter and educate the public. We plan to implement a multi-pronged communication and marketing campaign that will include collaboration with TSA and others. The theme, double check before the checkpoint. We will produce an educational video. We will record an updated TSA announcement running periodically on the airport's public address system. We will utilize social media, and we will also plan to assess and improve related airport signage. Thank you for your time and for your consideration of this new ordinance that will help to ensure public safety at John Glenn International. I'd like to now turn over to our Columbus Regional Airport Authority President and CEO, Joe Nardoni. He and Chief Gray are bullish on safety for our passengers, and Joe's perspective has motivated us all to ensure we are doing all we can within this space.
Thank you, Kristen. Good evening, sir.
Good
Mr.
evening.
Chairman.
Yes?
Thank you so much for your kindness and hospitality as we've worked on this issue. I also want to thank the members of the Columbus City Council, Mayor Ginther, and City Attorney Zach Klein for recognizing that safety is #1 at the airport and at any airport in the United States. Also like to acknowledge those who have been so helpful on this issue from the city perspective. Laura Baker-Moorish has been tireless in her efforts to assist. Thank you, Laura. And also Grant Ames and John Oswald have spent significant time with us, so thank you to all three of them. While Columbus may be the beginning of someone's journey into the national air travel industry, it's once someone clears the TSA checkpoint here in Columbus, they have opportunities to absolutely cause a disruption in the air system throughout the U.S. While we're concerned about what happens here, we're also concerned about what happens in the air system across the U.S. If you got on an aircraft at John Glenn and had a firearm, you do not have to cross through security again, and you can be either in Atlanta or Minneapolis or Detroit or Chicago or L.A. And have that firearm with you. So we're very concerned about a firearm passing through our TSA. The disturbing trends throughout the U.S., and Kristen mentioned them, are causing many local communities to step up and create more ordinances and laws to make sure they can protect the flying public. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I served as the CEO of Detroit Metropolitan Airport, and we have a similar ordinance law in effect. If you pass through the checkpoint without a permit, you will be charged with a felony in Detroit, and if you pass through with a permit, you'll be charged with a misdemeanor. So I just want to point out that we are not anti-gun. It's not legal to bring firearms into the airport appropriately. So this is not really about guns as much as it is a threat to our air system. You can properly travel, of course, with a firearm if you unload and pack it and comply with TSA requirements. Check in and always make sure that everyone knows that you are carrying a weapon. We're just asking passengers to make sure when they show up at the checkpoint that they travel safely and that firearms are all secured and not available to the traveling public on the aircraft. With that, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say, before I turn it back to Kristen, that we could not have received better reception from you and your team, and we're very, very thankful for you listening and for you helping. Our efforts here are just to protect the traveling public, and we're grateful for your support.
Thank you for your comments. Kristen?
Thank you, Joe. And Chief Ron Gray is here with us as well, and I think that he will be helpful in sharing some of the ways that our officers help when a firearm would be discovered at the checkpoint. Chief?
Thank you, Kristen. Councilmember Brown, thank you for entertaining us tonight. At John Glenn Columbus International, the law enforcement services are provided by the Columbus Airport Police Department. And the screening at the Columbus Airport, John Glenn, is conducted by the Transportation Security Administration, also known as the TSA. At the beginning of the screening lanes, a TSA sign displays items that are prohibited in the restricted area. Additionally, within the screening lane, there are 2 additional signs that indicate that firearms and bladed weapons are not allowed and are prohibited in the area. Firearms and dangerous weapons are typically discovered during the screening process by TSA screeners. When a firearm or a dangerous weapon is discovered by TSA requests a police officer to respond. Officers are then dispatched to the checkpoint to investigate the incident. The officers at that point will verify that it is actually a weapon that is prohibited. Officers will then seize the weapon and secure the weapon in a travel container to be transported up to police headquarters for further investigation and to make the weapon safe. The individual involved is also temporarily seized and detained for investigation up in headquarters. During this initial police response and investigation, the involved screening lane is shut down for security concerns. The screening lane shutdown results in delays and inconvenience and annoyance to other passengers waiting to be screened. Under the current law, we must establish a culpable mental state of knowingly in order to prosecute for the offense. If the culpable mental state of knowingly is established, the individual will be arrested or summoned. In 2019, this occurred only one time. Out of the 29 instances, we were able to establish a knowingly culpable mental state one time, and we charged that, and that individual is currently under indictment. If knowledge cannot be established, the individual will be released and the firearm is returned to the owner in an unloaded capacity. The involved individual is then required to secure the firearm properly before they may continue the screening process. Typically, this is done by returning the firearm to the individual, and the individual leaves the airport temporarily and secures the firearm in their vehicle within our lot, which is also not a desirable outcome. At this time, we thank you for your consideration and support of the Airport Police Department and Columbus Regional Airport Authority in this matter. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Baker Morris, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Brown. I'm here to describe a little bit about what the proposed changes would be to the Columbus City Ordinance to address the concerns that have been raised by members of the Airport Police and Airport Authority. Within the Columbus City Code currently, we do have a criminal trespass provision, and arguably some of those provisions might apply to circumstances in which an individual attempts to enter into the secure area without having secured their firearms. However, what we have discovered is that there are some difficulties with the current code, and the proposed ordinance language here seeks to enhance the existing code and to also allow for and address some of the concerns that currently exist. Specifically, what we have proposed is creating a provision that specifically targets airport security areas as a location where you have an enhanced desire to assure that individuals are complying with the signage that tells them that they cannot bring these particular items into the secured area. So this would be a reckless trespass into an airport security area. The elements of the offense would be similar to criminal trespass in that there would have to be notification and signage, which we've worked with the airport police and the airport authority in indicating what appropriate signage would be needed. And I do believe that their education campaign and the signs that they're creating would establish for the individuals who are coming to the airport the necessity of being aware and being informed that they have this obligation. The second thing that it addresses, another concern that Chief Gray has mentioned, is what do we do with the firearm? Currently, if we don't meet the criteria for the felony level offense, the knowingly offense that the chief referred to, then what has happened is the individuals have had their firearms returned to them and they have to secure them. By adding within the city code provision in criminal trespass the allowance or the ability to seek forfeiture of the weapon, that also gives the airport the discretion, should they choose to use it, to retain the firearm or to retain the weapon, and then to seek forfeiture from the court so that that firearm cannot be returned to the individual. I just want to stress that this is not a requirement of the ordinance, but it's an allowance of the ordinance. So if the circumstances warrant, and if the chief of police or the police department indicates that they want to exercise that discretion, this city code provision would allow them to seek that from the court. Ultimately, it would be a determination of both the prosecution, whether or not to continue to further seek that forfeiture, and ultimately of the court as to whether or not to order it. But it does give us another tool that we didn't currently have.
Chief, how would you react to the suggestions with regards to changing the amendments?
We support the amendment in that it lowers the threshold from knowingly to reckless. And the posting of the signs, we believe, are appropriate, and we will put additional, as Christian noted, voice overlay in our current system. Currently, it basically talks about unattended bags. It will also be, many airports use this technology now to notify people they need to check their bags before occurring. And it's my opinion, as a police official, that individuals that are authorized to carry weapons, be it under the allowable laws, have a higher standard to know where their firearm is at. And that is not occurring at this time. It is not uncommon for CCW holders to go through these checkpoints, and their common answer is they are so accustomed to carrying the firearm, they forgot that it was in the bag. So we strongly support the recommendations of the City Council. Thank you.
So, Chief, let me just sort of elaborate here, or ask the question. So if I forgot, and I have my weapon in my carry-on, and I get to the TSA, what exactly is going to happen to me? And I say, I forgot, I had a weapon in my bag, and it's loaded.
Once they get there, and it is most often discovered during the X-ray technology when they put it on the bag belt, and that is when the screening process begins. But there is lines. The line has, like I said, there's 3 different signs. And once TSA discovers that, it puts an alarm in place in which we're notified to come down there, and it causes difficulty for the traveling public. It also results in the firearm at that point is temporarily seized, but we, under the current law, don't have addition to go further. And when we interview these people, most of them are cooperative in the interview. I've not seen anyone not be cooperative with regard to why they have the firearm. And their excuse or explanation, it is difficult to prove beyond the court standard of a reasonable doubt or even probable cause in order to make an arrest that they did not know that that firearm was in there. There is limited cases. The one that we are proceeding with now, the individual actually is an official out of state that works at a correction facility, which would have a higher standard that they're carrying the firearm. They brought the firearm here from another state in order to get it back. They knowingly knew that that firearm was there, therefore we were able to establish it. This law will allow the degree to be reduced down to reckless, which indicates that they recklessly disregarded the instructions on the signage that they have a duty to inspect that stuff. TSA is a civil organization, and they're allowed to administer civil fines. We typically, at the police department, are not advised whether an individual that brought a firearm through the checkpoint was fined or not due to privacy concerns that are in place. But the TSA does have the authority to levy fines. The fine for that particular offense starts at $4,000, but we are not under any consideration or knowledge of what TSA does.
Your conversations with TSA with regards to the proposed changes, have they expressed a position?
We have discussed it with them, and they are supportive of the program. They are supportive of any action that can restrict the carriage of any firearms into that restricted area. Yes, sir, they are.
So if I'm a passenger and I'm walking through the airport, and I guess this is probably a question for Mr. Easterday, how many times from the time I actually get on the airport property am I going to be informed that from this point on, if I have a weapon, it needs to be checked?
Councilmember Brown, you will be at a minimum 5 times. Once you enter the ticketing level, every door is marked with a sign. Once you go to the ticketing lobby, there is also 2 signs there. Depending on what ticket lobby you go to or what airline you go to, there may or may only be 1, but some of them have 2. There are large signs, and once you leave the ticketing area, you go to the checkpoint, and each checkpoint is similar. We have 3 checkpoints at John Glenn International. At the beginning of the checkpoint, there is a TSA sign that states, and it has a sign. The sign indicates what items are prohibited in that area. Once they proceed past that, there are an additional 2 large signs that are brightly colored red and black that indicate a firearm and a bladed weapon, that those items are prohibited in that area. Technically, the TSA argues that once they enter the line, once they cross the first sign, that is the area of inspection. Some prosecutors throughout the states would argue that the inspection doesn't start until you place it on the bag belt. But that is not an issue for our concern, but once we discover it, that is when we would take possession and action to address the problem.
And with that, as was stated in the slide presentation, the audio information informing people again, when would that actually take place? Is that going to be at the checkpoint, or where would you actually try to remind people that if they do have a sidearm or they have a weapon, whichever it may be, to not go any further?
Councilmember Brown, currently now the TSA standard states that every 30 minutes we have an audio that has to be played throughout the terminal. Currently that audio speaks to only bags, and unattended bags will be confiscated. We would add a statement in there to indicate that firearms are prohibited within the checkpoint area. Firearms and other dangerous ordnance are prohibited. So it would run every 30 minutes from the time someone entered the terminal until they pass through the checkpoint and go into the sterile area.
And I guess, Laura, the question would be, if a firearm is confiscated, how would you address the issue in the sense of the individual wanting to get their weapon back?
So if the firearm is confiscated, then the airport authority has the discretion and decision to make at that point in time. They can either choose to cite the individual with a violation or not cite the individual with a violation. If they choose to cite the individual, then they can make a decision as to whether or not they want to retain the gun for evidence because they've issued the citation, or they can make a decision as to whether or not they are going to not retain the gun for evidence. If they retain it for evidence, then again, the airport authority would have a decision to make under this new ordinance whether or not they would also seek forfeiture. So what would happen, practically speaking, is the individual would be charged with a misdemeanor violation, a misdemeanor of the second degree. They would be given a copy of the complaint. Again, the authority would have to determine whether or not they're going to do that on a summons or if they're going to arrest the individual, depending on the circumstances. And then within that complaint, it would also indicate whether or not the authority was seeking forfeiture of the weapon at the end of resolution of the case. That would then be translated down to the Franklin County Municipal Court. The prosecution would then pursue it from there, and then the prosecution would determine whether or not to seek the forfeiture if asked for by law enforcement.
Now, does that involve a weapon, let's say it's a firearm, that is loaded or unloaded?
This would predominantly be, well, it would involve either. The violation is not limited to loaded or unloaded weapons, but what is more likely is if it's a loaded weapon, then there's also a possibility. And I just want to make clear, while this particular ordinance allows for the reckless culpable mental state, the knowingly mental state that is the felony offense does still exist. So if during the interview process it is determined that they do have probable cause to believe that the individual knowingly brought a loaded firearm into the area, they could still be charged with the felony offense and the felony violation. This just gives them an additional tool which could be used for either loaded or unloaded weapons.
Could you speak to how 2223, 2112 carrying a concealed weapon, whether or not that would have any implications with regards to someone coming onto the property?
So the carrying a concealed weapon provisions under the Ohio Revised Code do allow individuals to enter airport property with a concealed weapon. The distinction here is that once you enter the secure area, the checkpoint area, that's where there is a prohibition to having this weapons. And this is what's created the confusion, and this is why the education here is also so important. An individual might believe, and it is lawful for them to do so, that they can come into the airport lobby area with a weapon. They can do that because they can do that to check their bags, they can do that, they can have it on their person. But once you enter the secure area, you're now entering the area that's in the concurrent jurisdiction of the TSA, and it is prohibited that you bring those weapons or those dangerous ordinances or blade knives into an area where you're now going to be entering the airplane itself.
Mr. Nardoni, again, you made mention earlier that if someone were to get past that area, then it becomes a problem for other airports, the receiving airport, and the person has to make different connections. Would you speak to that with a little more clarity for me, please?
Yes, sir, it's my pleasure. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So if you get past the first screening at John Glenn International, you could connect to a flight, as I said, at one of the hubs, and you could get on a large aircraft that was bound for Asia or Europe or other any place else, and with a large number of passengers. And of course, we all saw what happened on 9/11. I mean, it's a threat, sir, to the entire air system and residents both in the air and on the ground.
Chief, you're looking at me. You wish to speak to that as well?
I agree.
Turn the microphone on, please.
I agree, Councilmember. We look back to 9/11, those airplanes were taken over with box cutters and small knives, and when you put a firearm into the mix, it makes it even more deadly. Even though TSA and the FAA has gone to the length to secure the cabins a little more with the doors, a firearm allows, these doors are not armored.
Secured.
You can fire into the cabin, and you could take out the pilots, which would cause severe damage to the plane and possible crash of that aircraft and take the lives of however many persons were on that aircraft. And it also, once they get to the next airport, as we saw in Fort Lauderdale, it caused a issue with a active shooter situation in which someone proceeded to shoot and cause injury and death to several people at the Fort Lauderdale airport. So it is very important that we contain that sterile area, and that is exactly what it is. Once they pass that area, they're in an area where they're going to have no additional searches throughout their flights. No additional security is going to be taken on that person. So it puts, like Mr. Nardoni stated, it puts the whole air system into jeopardy. And what it does is, even if harm is not caused, once that aircraft, if that firearm is located, that aircraft is taken out of service. Therefore, all the connecting flights with that airline is taken out of service, and it costs the airlines hundreds of thousands of dollars every time a plane is taken out of service. It inconveniences not just hundreds of people on the flight, it indicates all the connecting flights, and it affects thousands of passengers just because of one person's inappropriate actions.
Chief, one of the things that comes to my mind, you mentioned someone that is currently in the mix with regards to bringing a firearm into a secure area. Lots of law enforcement officers travel, and they like to travel, take their weapons with them. One of the suggestions that comes to my mind is possibly a letter from you to some of the other law enforcement agencies informing them of the responsibility that a law enforcement officer, if he or she is going to be traveling, and they wish to take their weapon with them, that they make sure they notify the appropriate people. Otherwise, they'll be treated just like anyone else who would be infringing on that secure area. Would that make any sense?
That is correct. I mean, they are not immune. We, last year, had 2 law enforcement officials that inappropriately brought their firearms through the checkpoints. And through that process, what we do is we take a little more action. We take it very serious with law enforcement, and we do notify their employer and their agency that that has occurred and that action, and that they could actually be fined by the TSA, and we let them know so they can conduct their own administrative investigation to ensure that they followed their established policy. So yes, I would be amicable to making that notification. There are certain procedures that allow officers to arm officers to travel, but there are established procedures that must be established in order for them to do that. They have to take a course that tells them what they can and can't do. They have to notify TSA, and they have to sit in certain locations on the airport so everyone knows where they're at in the plane, and that there's certain procedures that they have to go through. And that is an established procedure and established course that any law enforcement official that is flying or will be flying is required to take, and should be taken by any other officer that is carrying a firearm. But again, I believe that law enforcement officers have a higher duty to know where their firearm is at all times.
So when we looked at the signage, and I guess, again, I'll go back to you, Christian, are you proposing to increase, or from a visual standpoint, to grab someone's attention immediately, should they knowingly, and I'm going to be careful here because I know Ms. Morris will get on me about, I forgot. I have a weapon in my bag. But I'm going to be confronted with multiple opportunities to be educated not to go to the next level. Is that correct?
Correct. So today, we have 5 signs at least. We believe passengers will go through from the entrances of our terminal facility, ticketing counter, all the way through the security lines. We look to do another assessment and to add additional signage, potentially even prior to entering the terminal. So we will do a thorough assessment and add additional signage, in addition to an educational campaign over social media, some videos, as well as on our monitors and our PA system.
Again, my thoughts are that the more we educate people, the better the chances are that you're not going to get this. And as we attempt to take a look at the legislation to see whether or not we can or cannot move forward with that, it's, again, it's very disturbing to me to think that people would say, obviously, I forgot. Certainly it is unacceptable for law enforcement officers to say they forgot. As you simply try and convey that message so that others who are following the law aren't put at risk or in jeopardy. So that becomes very, very serious for me. And I guess when we talk about what the rules are today and not a radical change to the proposed amendments, am I correct?
That's correct, Your Honor. Your Honor. It's correct, Chair Brown. It's not a radical change, but it is a change that gives the airport police a few more tools. And I think the education piece, to your point, is really important here. Again, the idea is to get into individuals' minds. This should become second nature, that when you go to the airport, you check to make sure you don't have your weapon. And the education component of not just about, hey, you can't have one, but double check before you get to the checkpoint is the point. It's about changing the behaviors to make sure that part of going to the airport, I'm going to a checkpoint, I should double check my bags. If I'm a CCW carrier in particular who carries their weapon often, I should double check my bags and make sure they're not there because I'm going to a secure area. And to Chief Gray's point, I know a number of individuals who have CCW carry holders are law-abiding citizens that could have forgotten. The signs are to get them to do that double check and to make sure they didn't, because the danger is not necessarily from the weapon holders themselves, but from the fact that that weapon is in the secure area, is in the sanitized area. It can now be accessed by other individuals who may not be as safe and may not be as law-abiding.
Again, Mr. Nardone, you may mention you've worked at other airports. Is what is being proposed here a radical change from what is existing in some other facilities? Because from what I understand, the numbers are still going around the country of people attempting to get into secure areas, knowingly or not unknowingly, but it doesn't really matter. You're in a secure area. Is it a radical change from what is being done elsewhere?
No, sir, I don't think it's a radical change. There certainly are different airports that have different laws. In Detroit, it was a local ordinance, local law. So no, I don't think it's radical. I do think there are places that you can turn around and take your car back, or take your weapon back to your car and then go through the checkpoint. That even happens at Columbus John Glenn International. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that we're clear on this. Our intent isn't to penalize or hurt gun holders or lawful folks. Our intent is to continue educating. Our intent is we would be very happy, folks, if not one gun showed up at the checkpoint. That is really what we're after, because one gun is so incredibly disruptive to an airport system.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, you've been at the airport how long now? Just 2 years that you came here?
25 months, Mr. Chairman, but who's counting?
Yeah. I just remember when you first got here. And our airport is growing and changing in the sense of its attractiveness. You're looking at doing international flights, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, we have been looking at international flights. As I mentioned to you prior to the public hearing, only 2 years ago, we had 7.5 million passengers. This year, past year, 2019, we had 8.6 million passengers. We're growing at a great rate, and things like guns past checkpoints and these kinds of things can ultimately hurt the travel industry, can hurt travel. It's amazing what one problem can cause. So we're just very vigilant about making sure that we're safe. And TSA, the transportation folks, are very careful, and every gun that shows up gets treated very seriously. You will see very serious looks on the face of the TSA officers and our folks when something shows up. But I think that this is just a very helpful ordinance to protect both the residents of Columbus and Mid-Ohio and the air traveling public.
Thank you. At this time, if there were, I'd take public comment, but I don't believe we had any speaker slips. So what I would like to forward on is to say if members of the community have any further questions or concerns, please feel free to contact my office at 614-645-4605. I'd like to certainly thank President Nardoni, Chief Gray, Ms. Esterday, and of course the City Attorney, Laura Baker Morris, for bringing this issue to my attention and for your presentation this evening. I would also like to recognize my staff, Denise Friend Foster, John Oswald, Grant Ames, and City Council staff for preparing this evening's hearing. Following this evening's public hearing, my office will solicit public input on the proposed changes to the Columbus City Code, and then based on that feedback, an ordinance will be drafted with the proposed changes. In closing, I would like to thank the community for their engagement in this afternoon's proceedings. I think it's also very important to realize that all this is all about public safety. It's not about, as you stated earlier, Mr. Nardoni, we're not trying to take away anybody's guns, but we need to have people aware of the fact that when they're flying, it's a secure environment, especially once you get past a certain point. People come on the airport, you have open carry, we have obviously concealed carry, but once you get into that secure area, that's a whole different ballgame with regards to the security of the public and the flying public in particular. So thank you all, and that concludes this public hearing.